We're nothing if not impromptu. Hi, everyone. I'm Susan Smith. You are in my studio, Stitched by Susan. And when I'm doing these live shows, we often do a little mini intro at the beginning, and I chat about what we're going to be working on and something I've been doing during the week while Mr. Producer checks the sound and the camera and all of that stuff, because 50% of the time things aren't working somewhere. And so I always get carried away and I get so busy talking, and then he's like, whoa, Susan, stop. We're going to have to start all over again. So this is the real start to the real show. Welcome to Live and Unscripted. Today's project is a super wonky quilt. And by wonky, I mean not flat. It has got a series of borders around it and an absolute Swiss Alps of fullness in the central area. So do we want to have a camera that shows across it for a minute so people even know what I'm talking about? And let me put my coffee down while we do that. So this central area, there's a rectangle with these large blocks on point, and it's like a sampler quilt. Each one is a little bit different. And then there are 8 borders, some of them which have cornerstone piece blocks and all kinds of things around the edge. Right at the first border, this whole center was eased into it, which is why the middle has all this fullness, although the borders themselves lay fairly flat. I'm up for a challenge, so I said, I'm going to try it. And did I mention I acquired this quilt at a garage sale, so I had $40 invested in it. And I thought for a minute of just saying, too much work, not worth it. But then I thought, I'm up for a challenge, and wonky quilts are kind of my specialty. So I opted to go ahead and do it. So we're doing what we can with it today. Interestingly, yesterday I was on YouTube Live for just a few minutes talking about it too, and about, what was coming down the pipe, so to speak. And someone commented after that and said, well, why don't you consider taking off the borders, taking out 1 or 2 of these inner borders so that the outer ones would fit better, right? You'd have a little more leeway, a little more length, and you wouldn't have eased into as small of a space. Does that make sense? If all these outer ones were to scooch in a little bit, I would have had more fabric to work with there. That person, and I'm sorry I can't remember her name. Do we want the front camera again, Dave, please? That person was absolutely right. That is for sure an option. And now that I've started quilting and see how hard it is, I think maybe that would have been the better option. But my thinking was, I'm just not prepared to spend that amount of time on a quilt that's not really my style or taste. It's a 90s quilt, and it's it's a nice quilt. It's lovely cotton fabric and everything like that. But anyway, I was not prepared to spend that time on it. So we're just doing the best we can. And I'm through the first row of those sampler blocks already, so I'm well into that central area, and it's going okay. I can tell by looking at it, I can see. There's like every feather plume that's on here has fullness in it, and I can see that. But I don't think if you were a quilter, you would actually know. I've managed to not get pleats, and so I think it's okay. Anyway, I think what we should do is start quilting, and I'll keep talking as we go about some of the decisions that I made over this quilt and some of the steps that I'm taking as I'm quilting it. I'm about 2/3 of the way through one pass, so I'll finish that pass and then we'll advance it. And then there'll be a lot of things to talk about because there's quite a few steps that I take every time I advance the quilt in order to try and manage, as I said, the Swiss Alps, the Rocky Mountains, maybe even the Himalayas. I'm telling you, it's crazy. Okay, let's quilt. Yes? Okay. I just oiled. I was quilting late last night and early this morning. So I just oiled my machine, put in a new bobbin, and I picked up my seam ripper, which was marking my spot. And so now I don't know where I was. So bear with me while I figure it out. Here we are. Here we are. So I am quilting one of my own free motion designs that I call Plume. I bet it'll look familiar to you. Other quilters use a design that is similar. It's got kind of a feathery motif around a spiral center. Let me just snip those thread tails, and then we'll go on. So you can see in this close-up camera, where's my hand? It's not, yeah, there we are. You'll see as I go. I've got my fabric kind of ruched up in place, and I'll be using my left hand to manipulate it. And when I get to some of the trickiest places, I'll talk to you a little bit about some of the things I actually do with my hand. I was thinking about this as I was quilting last night, because I don't know that I've ever tried to put in words before what I do, but I'll try and do that for you. This is definitely a quilt where it is beneficial to be able to quilt with one hand and manipulate fabric with the other. Here's what I'm doing. When I'm swooping out around my circle, I'm literally pushing the fabric in, so I get a nice big swoop. And then as I go back in with my needle, I'm kind of pulling it back. So watch this. Push it in, pull it back so that it doesn't form a pleat. Push it in, pull it back. Push it in, pull it back. So that's literally the motion that I use to help me squeeze as much fullness into every one of those feather plumes as I possibly can. One other thing that I do is when there is fullness in a slim area that I need to put a line of stitching through, I endeavor to stitch down the middle of it instead of pushing it to one side. So again, I'll push or pull or do whatever I need to do with my fingers to get that stitching line, to be in the middle of the fullness rather than pushing it to one side. That also really helps to avoid the pleats. So let's chat a little bit about what some of my prep was for this quilt. It's huge. It's 87 by 106. And so I needed 3 yardages of fabric side by side to get a backing that was long enough for that whole quilt. So on the finished quilt, my backing yardage pieces are going to run crossways across the quilt. And as you perhaps know from watching me in other episodes, when all other things being equal, I usually prefer to load a quilt with the length of the quilt along my long arm rails, so literally on its side, because I have fewer passes or advances when I'm quilting. But I opted not to do that with this one because with those long seams, I didn't want to have to load them, rolling them onto the rollers lengthwise. Does that make sense? That can be tricky to do, and I do it on smaller quilts, but I thought with those really long seams, that's apt to pull up a little bit, pull a little bit tightly, and that would be difficult to deal with. So I opted to load my quilt right side up. So we are literally working on it side to side here, and my backing seams are running side to side. I have 1 layer of Winline 80/20 batting. I briefly thought about doing 2 layers of batting because fluffy batting can really help take up this fullness. As you can imagine, if there was more fluff here, like you could literally get more puffiness in each of these feather plumes. However, again, considering my specific project, I realize it's so big, it's already so heavy, and a 2nd layer of batting is just going to become unwieldy, heavy to sleep under, almost impossible to wash in a home washing machine. So I opted to just do the best that I could with a single layer of batting. But if you were working on a smaller quilt, that would be actually a good, helpful solution. You could do 2 layers of 80/20. You could do 1 80/20 plus something fluffier like wool, or the fluffiest of all, polyester. So those were some of the things I did to prep. Let's see what else. I'm not sure that you'll ever have a glimpse of it in the camera, but I have shown it before. On the leveler bar, which is resting on top of my quilt at the back of my working area, I have affixed a tape measure, a long armer's tape measure, so it's a really long one. So when I loaded the quilt, I made a note of the measurement of the left side of my quilt and the measurement on the right side of my quilt. And typically when I do that, I then try to zhuzh my quilt into that measurement with every pass. You know, it often involves kind of pulling out on the edges and getting it pulled back to that starting width. But with this quilt, I'm not actually trying to get it perfectly square. I've kind of come to grips with the fact that it's not likely going to be perfectly square. I'm okay with a margin of unsquareness. However, knowing what those measurements are helps me to judge how far out of square I'm going, if that makes sense. So at the moment, I've been able to keep it within an additional 1/2 inch on each side. So I'm okay with that. My quilt is 87 inches across at the end, and it's going to be 88 or maybe 88.5 inches across in the middle, and I'm okay with that. To me, that's an acceptable margin of wonkiness. When I advance this and you see me working in the middle, hopefully you'll have a little sympathy for me. You'll understand why I just had to finally agree, like, it's not going to be perfect. And that's okay. That's okay. Like with the fullness in the feather plumes, you know, if you were not a quilter, I don't think you would ever notice that margin of difference in a quilt. We quilters have an eye out for those things, and we're attuned to them. But I think a non-quilter would not even ever notice that. Some other things that I find are happening, I like to, every time I advance, try and watch that my seam lines are running, you know, parallel or perpendicular, depending on which direction the seam is going, to the long arm rails. And a couple of the sampler blocks in the middle have multiple layers and or stabilizers. And so those blocks, I've done one already, I simply was not able to squunch it up and pull in the fullness. So what that did then is kind of distort the squareness of the block, you know, because I wasn't able to evenly pull it in. So again, I just have to come to grips with, that's the best I can do with what I've got. Yesterday I went live for a few minutes on YouTube talking about this, and I didn't hold the whole quilt up because it's huge, but I kind of held a chunk of it up and said, this is what I'll be working on, and here's the challenges. And after I got off air, someone commented, why don't you just take off those borders and absolutely eliminate, entirely eliminate, one of the inner borders, so that you've got a little more leeway, and the remaining borders you can put back on and they'll fit better. And she was absolutely right. That is absolutely a solution, and probably the best solution, and would have produced the best result. I just wasn't prepared to invest that much time in a garage sale quilt. That was just my personal choice. So I am making the best of it. I'm going to try and make a silk purse out of this. If you know that saying, you know. And of course this outer border is beautifully smooth. There's no excess fabric here. And we're going to stop right there, needle down, and do an advance. So great time for any questions, you guys, or any comments, or frankly, any tips. Let me just get this rolled up, and then I will stand in the center again, and we'll talk about that just a little. And this next pass will take us to the middle point of the quilt. So you're going to get to see the worst of it. Because, of course, this excess is not just in one direction. It's in both, right? So top to bottom and side to side. So I did like I said, it's a very huge quilt. I did do my best to lay it out flat and measure and try to calculate what that fullness was. So the outer borders are 87 inches by 106. The inside, can we be on the central camera, Dave? The inside had about 5 more inches this way if I pulled the quilt out in the middle, and top to bottom had 7. So either one of those on their own is not awful, but both of them, like, it really is the Swiss Alps. Okay, I just had you change camera, but let's change it back one more time and look at this middle. Can you see this? This is what the middle of the quilt looks like. Like, we are talking Swiss Alps. Seriously, look at this. Look at this. And I've got the borders, you know, tugged down nice and smooth. And I'm looking at what's in front of me here, kind of judging, am I getting enough of it up in there? I mean, I hope so. I've still definitely got a smiley face down here, but I'm going to do this with every pass, right? And so I'll keep managing it. Okay, what things do I do with each advance? The first one you kind of saw me do quickly, and I do this with every quilt, not just full ones. I tugged on the batting also and make sure that that batting is nice and smooth. Sometimes last night when I was working on it, I even flipped the quilt all together up to be sure that the batting's not kind of pinching in. It sometimes does that. It will stretch out a little bit on the sides and then pinch its way in. So I wanted to tug that down and make sure that it's smooth. Mr. Producer is saying, when you do have a question, would you put QQ in front of it so that he can run a search for the questions and find them more readily. Okay, so I've tugged the batting down. And then I'm tugging both sides, my border, which is smooth. I'm making sure that's well tugged down. I don't want to stretch it like crazy. I just want to make sure I've got every 1/4 inch out of it I can get. I'm watching my measurements at the side of the quilt, and I've gained about 5/8 of an inch, and I'm going to be okay with that on this side. I'm just going to be okay with it. The other place that I'm gaining a little bit of ground is, instead of my basting line running perfectly straight along that outer edge, it's an 8-inch border, so I'm allowing my basting to go to about 1/2 an inch right now, right? So the net result is I've gained a little under 1/2 an inch in actual quilt measurement on each side, and I'm okay with that. So let's baste that a little bit, and then let's look at questions. I'll baste this side, and I'll come over to the other side. So here too, I'm basting at about 1/2 an inch instead of 1/4. And you can see I don't have tons and tons of extra backing. This was a partial bolt that I had on hand, and I cut it into 3 equal pieces. And so I've got less than 4 inches on each side, but it's doing okay. Okay, there's that side. You'll notice as I'm prepping this advance, usually I talk a lot about basting the sides and securing this front edge. And I have magnetic bars that I put on this front edge. There's multiple ways you can do it, but I usually lay magnetic bars because generally I don't want my quilt to pull up as I'm putting in my quilting design. I don't want it to be pulling its way in and smaller. But in this case, I do want that. That's going to work in my favor. So I'm not putting anything on this front. I'm pulling it up to be what I think is reasonably straight along this front rail. You know, my squares are on point, so I don't have any obvious seam lines to go by. I'm just kind of using my judgment. And then, and this is key, I'm kind of spreading out or dispersing all this fullness as evenly as I can. It's the best way to set yourself up for being able to work it into the spaces. I've done this quite a few times, so I'm kind of doing it by guess and by gosh, but sometimes I've gone so far as to actually drop some pins in here so that as I'm quilting, that pin gives me a sort of marker, right? Like I know I've got to have worked in this excess by the time I get to that pin. Certainly you can't allow yourself to keep pushing it away in front of you. That's going to be a problem. Like when you've got it dispersed like this, now you've got to get it quilted in there. And I mentioned too that I run into a little bit of the seam lines start getting crooked, and I'm definitely seeing that in the middle. There's so much fullness in this area that I don't think I can get quilted in, so I'm pushing some of it out to the outer edge. So I expect when my quilt is done, these seam lines are going to look a little bit bulgy too. Again, I just think it's the best I can achieve. That's all I can do is my best. Right? So there we are. Okay, we got any questions? I will. I'll move Stella and then we'll no, we'll chat first.
Okay.
All right.
Let's start at the top.
Quilty Mama, worst case scenario, quilt it. Best you can turn it into a quilted jacket. You're right. You're right. That's a good solution in the end. Better than balling it up and Bobbin with Brittany. I act like I can judge this quilt's wonkiness, but I'm working on my oldest work in progress today, and the piecing is horribly crooked and warped. And it happens. I kind of said that in my newsletter. You know, all of us face wonky quilts, and sometimes they're our own. It's just reality. But it's kind of a fun challenge. You learn an awful lot about fabric and how far you can manipulate it when you're working with a wonky quilt. So it's a good experience builder. Nita, magically too, once you've got her finished and bound through the washing machine, hot water and into the dryer, bam, you won't even see the hills. You're so right, Nita. And I fully think that a person who's not a professional quilter is never going to know the difference, right? So that to me is success. Karen, do you ever turn a custom quilted quilt on the frame to do the long sides in one pass? If so, do you have tips for reattaching the heavy quilt to the leaders? Yeah, unrelated to today's topic, but yes, I have turned them. I don't have a spectacular tip for that. I really don't, except that it's very helpful if you've got some more excess, like not just 4 inches of backing beyond your quilt. 8 is much easier because you've just got a flatter expanse of fabric to work with when trying to attach it to the leader. So that would be my top tip. Leave yourself some extra backing. I always like to with custom quilts in any number of ways. It's helpful. Donna, so you're intentionally making a little puffiness here and there to compensate for the wonkiness? That's correct, Donna, because if I just pulled it all smooth, as I worked my way down the quilt, it would suddenly be so severe, there would be so much excess, I would never get it all worked in. What I'm attempting to do is work in some of it with each pass so that it's cumulative and so that I keep it managed and under control. And in order to do that, I'm just using my best guess on my straight front rail and where I think the quilt is, not sagging in the middle, right? That's what I'm trying to do. And it is something you want to do cumulatively. Diane, the dreaded phrase, it'll quilt out. Yes. It's kind of humorous, Diane. I feel like, I got this quilt at a garage sale, so I don't know who pieced it. I feel like whoever did it thought they did a really great job because it's good piecing, like the points match, the seams are pressed, like nothing's coming open or anything like that. That's kind of what I saw when I saw it at the garage sale too. I thought, oh, this is a person that knows how to make a quilt top, right? And they did. But the problem came with these on-point squares in the middle. They were able to ease a crap ton of fabric in with no actual pleats or puckers, but we've resulted in the Swiss Alps in the middle of the quilt. So I feel like possibly that's why they didn't finish it and why I inherited it at a garage sale.
This is when you were describing the quilt in detail.
Okay, stitching with the sisterlies. OMG, I hope the piecer of the quilt isn't listening. Well, I mean, I kind of do too. But seriously, like my compliments in the piecing, it's well done. The key, I think, to this, I'm a fan of measure twice, cut once, right? Because that's my podcast. The key to this would have been to take this central portion and lay it out flat and measure it and make the borders to fit, right? I suspect that they pre-cut the borders based on what the pattern said and ease that central portion to fit the borders. It's always wise when you're making a border to just wait until your central portion is pieced. Because if your quilt is half an inch bigger or half an inch smaller, it really doesn't matter. But make the borders the same is the key. So measure and then cut the borders. That's my advice. That's how it could have been avoided. Betsy, have you used pins down the sides to keep a degree of wonkiness within a specific area? I did talk about that briefly, Betsy, and I absolutely could. I've done this enough times that I just know not to push that wonky out of the way, like get it done, but you certainly could drop pins here and there to like give yourself guardrails. This much wonkiness and this much wonkiness. Yeah, good times. Quilty Mama, if this was a client's quilt, would you even attempt this or send it back to them to fix? That's a really super question, Tracy. Probably what I would have done is called them and said, here are your options. You can take the borders off and fix, or here's the type of results you can expect. You get to choose. And then whatever they chose, I'd do. But I'd be honest about the results. Like, you're probably going to have pleats. It's probably going to have a bulge. Like, it's going to be that way. Or you can, and then they could decide how much time they wanted to invest in that. Susan, I think this is probably the reason why the original quilter never quilted it, because they couldn't figure out how to do it. I think that's legitimately probably true. Probably she laid it out flat and thought, oh shoot, what have I done? Not going to bother with that. Stitching with the Sisterlies. I love that name, by the way. Helpful tips for piecers, because we don't necessarily realize how our tops affect the quilter. You know, if I was going to give any recommendation, I think that would be one, is through your process, but certainly at the end of piecing, lay your quilt out flat somewhere on 2 fold-out tables, or if you've got a floor space or whatever, and just see how flat it is. Because it can, when you're looking at a quarter of it or a block of it, it might, like this one, look well pieced and perfectly flat. But when you lay the whole thing out, you quickly see, has it got wavy borders or tight borders or wider in one place or hourglass shaped or whatever. And there's just no way to know that unless you look at the whole thing. So yeah, that is helpful for piecers. Joelle, I'm curious if you asked the person selling the quilt what they knew about it. I got a top at a garage sale from a 90-year-old woman whose mother had made it in the 30s. I appreciated the story. Do you know, I didn't ask Joelle only because the place where I buy it, I call it a garage sale, but it's really a local person who has a like a freestanding garage. And a couple times this summer, she opens that garage and it's full of textiles. So clearly she collects them all year. So I think she's going to garage sales and estate sales and acquiring this stuff. And then I get to go to her banquet of garage sale items and choose. So I don't think she knows the stories. They're not specifically her things. Although, you know, it would be wise to ask just in case. I'll do that next time. Janice, any hints about measuring large quilt middles for accurate determination of border lengths? Easier to do with smaller pieces, but tricky with larger ones. I mean, I guess my first tip would be like literally fold the quilt in half if you need to. But measure not only the edge of the quilt, but the middle of the quilt, right? So if you've got it folded in half like a piece of paper, measure across that top edge, but also measure across that fold. And if they are a little bit different, people think differently about it. Either, most commonly, you'll hear take an average, right? If they're a half an inch different, take an average. Ease that little bit in. A half inch or an inch of easing across a whole big quilt like this is no big deal at all. 5 and 7 inches is a bit of a big deal. Judy, could you just double bat in the center and single bat on the side? Possibly. I honestly didn't think of that, Judy, so I didn't do it. And I'm already well into it, so I'm not changing now. But yes, you probably could. Bobbin with Brittany, do you cut or rip your fabrics for making backing? I typically cut. I do have a pair of folding tables, so I have a big old cutting space. So I will, like my yardage is folded in half, and then I'll fold it over on itself, and I just snip along that fold, so it's pretty straight. That's what I do. Lots of people do tear them. So, Karen, I always feel a bit sad when I see handmade quilts in the thrift stores and at garage sales. So much time, talent, and love go into them. Thanks for rescuing this one. You're welcome. I feel the same way. Frankly, I have a closet full of probably 20 vintage quilts, like truly vintage, 30s, 40s quilts waiting for me to quilt one of these days. Nanette, do you use any starch or spray in the middle to shrink it a bit before quilting? So glad you asked. I was quilting last night, and typically the way you would do it is you would kind of soak it in starch and then leave it to dry, and that's when the shrinkage happens. So I was quilting last night thinking to myself, when I finish tonight, I'll spray everything that's exposed and see how much better it is in the morning. And then I totally forgot. And I came back to start the show this morning, and there was my starch standing. So I didn't. I could. I might for the next advance. Lisa, would you consider making a video of laying your quilt on the floor and all of the things you consider before you load a quilt? Oh gosh. One this big is tricky because I literally could hardly find a space. So edges of it were like up table legs and under shelving units. So it wouldn't be a pretty video. However, I have recently released a course called Machine Quilting for Beginners. And the first lesson in that one, I do, with a smaller example, I do show how I lay out even my client quilts to make sure the backing is big enough, you know, to make sure, is it directional, et cetera, and some of the things that I check for and assess. So it's part of that course. I hear you. Those are legit questions. Kim, I stitch the ditches of major seams I want to have lay straight or just baste them. Then I coax the top to evenly distribute fullness, then starch and press it to shrink it as much as I can. I did think, Kim, about stitching in the ditch of these squares. I had my doubts about it. I literally doubted whether I could get it all eased in under a ruler on a straight seam, for one thing. And I definitely doubt whether I can make those seam lines actually appear straight when it's all done. They're going to be a little bit, you know, because I've moved the fabric all around when I'm quilting. So would it be an option? Yes. But again, I wasn't prepared to spend the time on that. I think that could be a real hair puller to try and get this all eased into a straight seam. But I see your point about containing each block. It's an option. Absolutely. Victoria, I had an opposite situation. Borders were 4 inches longer than the middle. I've undone the borders, cut them to size, and reattached. Yes. And wavy borders are much more common than, you know, tight center. So yeah, you do see that more often. And if there's only 1 or 2 borders, it can be much easier to just take them off and fix than to deal with this situation. Debbie, my piecing has improved tremendously since I started long arming. There's like motivation there, right, Debbie? I don't want to have to quilt this out. Yeah. Betsy, wonder if the on-point setting triangles in the center were cut so the straight of grain was not on the outside edge, and therefore that edge was stretched when putting on the first border. The straight edge is on the outside edge of them. You know, but Betsy, it could be something as simple as their 1/4 inch seams were 2 threads scant. Do you know what I mean? And multiplied across all the piecing. Maybe each of these center blocks is 1/4 or 3/8 of an inch bigger than it should be. Again, multiplied. And that's why you wait until you have this center portion finished, and then you measure it and you cut the borders to fit. Because it really doesn't matter that they're a little bit bigger, except that the borders are cut smaller. That's all that matters. Evelyn, do you think one person made the whole quilt, or did someone else add the borders? I can't tell. It looks consistent on the back. Seam allowance width and all of that looks very consistent on the back. It's very well made. It's beautifully done.
That's it.
Okay, that's it for questions. We got to get started quilting, you guys. Okay, I've got to baste the other side. Again, I'm allowing myself to make my basting space just a bit wider. I'm running it at about 1/2 inch right now. So what's going to happen is when I trim this, right, my brown border is going to be a little slimmer in the middle than it is in the corners. But again, it's small. It's small. So I am still putting my side clamps on the sides of the quilt. That's important to keep the tension there. The only securing that I've eliminated is this the front rail. All right, we ended at that end, at my left side, right? Yes. So now we're going to start on the left side. I want to put my yardstick under this clamp. My yardstick is only for, you can hardly see me, but I'm lifting up my side clamp just a touch. Because I don't have a lot of space here, the nose of my long arm hits my side clamp if I don't hoist it a little bit. So my long straight, yardstick just lifts that up a touch. One last look at my disbursement. Also, you may see as I go, the central area of this quilt has some stains on it. And I opted not to wash it until it's quilted because I knew I was going to wash it in hot water. I think it was Nita that said that, and that's exactly what I'm going to do to make it shrink a little. I just didn't want the seam allowances going crazy fraying. Already it's fairly frayed just from the years it's been sitting around. So I opted not to wash it. I'm just working with it as is. It was not horrible. It doesn't smell badly or anything like that. It's just a little bit of yellowing. Here we go, you guys. I think for a few minutes I'm going to stitch in manual mode because I sure do like it. And I realize already, so soon I've quit. I've got my quilt advanced a little too far just for the one flower at that end. So back I go. Mr. Producer, he's so good. He's saying, where are your magnets? But he hasn't been listening. I'm not putting my magnets on today. But he does know the process. So there's that. One of these days, Dave's going to be doing the quilting on this show. So in case you're not familiar with it, I'm stitching now in manual or unregulated mode. So I have told my machine, stitch at 1400 stitches per minute, and that's how fast the needle is going. And it is entirely my job to determine the stitch length with the speed of my movement. If I move really fast, I'm going to have long, galloping stitches. If I move too slowly, I'm going to have a perforated quilt. Oops, and we have a broken thread. What's the scoop? Not sure what that's about. You know the drill. When that happens, I usually rethread it once and just rethread it and keep going. If it happens more than once, then I start looking a little deeper. Meantime, I will cast an eye out because one time last night my thread came out of like the first thread guide off the spool. That is certainly problematic, but that's not happening right now. But you know what? Looking back, you guys, are you seeing the close-up camera? Can we have the close-up on for a second? I'm actually seeing, and I was busy talking, so I didn't see it then. Do you see this little gnarl right here? If I had seen that happen, because I wasn't talking, I would have stopped right then because something went wrong right there. And I guarantee you on the back of the quilt, there is a gnarl. And I'm not going to like that. So I'm kind of glad the thread broke and it drew my attention to it because I don't want to leave a gnarl like that. So I'm going to go ahead and back up right to that place. Oh, we're right in a seam allowance here. We know it's stitching securely because, gosh, it's hard to undo. So while I undo this, let me tell you just a smidge about our trip to Europe. It was so interesting. It was on a Viking boat cruise. And Dave and I have never done that before. We've done ocean cruises, which, you know, tend to be beaches and poolside and relaxation and that sort of thing. But this cruise was very organized with tours and things to see. And as you can imagine, you know, in the areas where we were, Paris and Nuremberg and Cochem and all these different cities, there were castles and there were palaces and there were, you know, medieval towns and all these things to see. And so every day these tours were organized and we had local guides and it was so interesting. I'm a history buff and I came away with just a head full of thoughts and ideas and appreciation, and yeah, it was great. Now, mind you, we were there at just the very start of tourist season, but even so, the crowds, whoo! Sometimes in the moment, you felt like you were riding the London Tube. Seriously, it was elbow to elbow. However, that aside, my memories are very great. We had some fantastic tour guides. They were so interesting, so humorous, so engaging, and we learned a lot. My family is German on both sides of my parents, and so we actually drove through the province that my family came from, I don't know, 7 or so generations ago in northeastern France. It was kind of funny. Dave was feeling silly, so he snapped a picture out we were in a bus coach at this point driving, and the picture is like a field, a green field with nothing, not a tree, not a hill, not a house, not an anything. And he sent it to my sister, and he's like, oh, we're driving through the ancestral family, area. Did anything look familiar? No, nothing looked familiar at all. But still, it was fascinating. Yes, see that big chunk I just pulled? That was all stuck under the bottom. So, a phrase that I use often is know your machine. This is the kind of thing I mean. Like if I had been paying attention to the sewing, I literally would have seen that bubble when it happened, and I would have stopped right then, because that is a sign to me something went wrong. Something went wrong, right? No point in going on when something's not quite right. When I see, my thread that's feeding into the needle flashing too much, something's wrong. It's come out of a tension disc or something, right? When I hear a sound that's not quite right, all those things. The more you quilt, the more you get to know your machine, the sooner you see and diagnose these problems and don't get caught with having to undo massive amounts of a quilt. I am going to take half a second and have a look at the bobbin just to make sure all is well. It feels good. Maybe I'll just put a drop of oil in there while I'm here too. I need to do a brisk cleaning. I can see there's just little bits of oily sort of lint in my bobbin area. And it's not bad, but I'm just, kind of mental note here. When this quilt is finished, I need to get out my vacuum and my little pipe cleaners and just do a really good, thorough clean. And I do that fairly often. Lint is, I think, the #1 culprit of sewing machines and long arms. The #1 cause of problems. This time I remembered to drop my blue seam ripper so I could find my stitching. Okay, we're going to go back on stitch regulator. Sometimes that's easier just when I'm talking with you guys. Yeah, it's just easier. One less thing I have to think about. Although I do when I'm by myself, listening to an audible book or music or a podcast, I really enjoy the constant speed. It's just much more relaxing to sew in that way, just kind of get in the groove. Forgot to put my yardstick back in. Let's do that. It just lifts my quilt about, I don't know, ½ an inch. That's all I need, just a little lift. If you've not been on a live show before, let me point out something that you'll be able to see as I'm working across the quilt now. In general, I follow this on all my free motion quilting. I work in a kind of diagonal movement across my quilt surface. And the reason I do that is I don't want to have an awkward corner up here. I don't want to do a bunch of quilting close to me, right? And then have to try and get back in there. That's problem producing. It is. So my method then is to quilt close to me, and then at the back side of the quilt, that's what I start with next. So I'm going to work just like this. So if you keep an eye as I'm working through the quilt for a while, you'll see that come into play. And it's not a hard and fast 100% rule, but it is most of the time how I move across the quilt top. And that's how you keep from quilting yourself into a corner. So I'm going to fully fill up this area nearest to me here. And actually, I'm going to run back because that one little place was the only one where I was pinched for space. So I'm going to roll my quilt back up that 2 inches. So I get a full advance in here. There we go. I thought of it because I saw my basting line. I was like, huh, how come my basting line is so far down there? I can't quilt that far down. And then I remembered I had rolled up the quilt a little bit. So now watch as I work my way across the surface. I'll literally be working at an angle as I lay in these flowers. One of the other things that I do quite deliberately is alternate which side I begin on. So right now I'm on the left working toward the right. When I advance the quilt next, I'll start on the right and work toward the left. Depending on what shape you're quilting, sometimes it doesn't matter. But in this case, these are kind of floral designs, but they kind of have a petal side. And if I always quilt left to right, left to right, left to right, they're all going to be facing in the same direction. So the way to avoid that is quilt in both directions. And coincidentally, that is also very, very good at developing your quilting skills. Essentially, long arm quilters are trying to be ambidextrous. You want to be able to quilt equally well in any direction, up, down, left, right. So every time you do that, it just makes you better and better at that skill. Gosh, this one print is almost impossible to see on. I've just about got my nose in the quilt, trying to see where I'm going. So can you see how I've kind of moved diagonally? Filling in what's furthest away from me toward the right side, and then I'll angle back towards the lower left. Right here, I'm going to start making them in the other direction. And now we're into rumples, so we're going to slow down a little bit. Start using our left hand to manage all that stuff. Quilting one-handed is a fabulous skill too. It takes a bit of work, it absolutely does. But it is very, very helpful in situations like this. I've mentioned a couple times that I was live on YouTube yesterday briefly talking about this quilt. So over the next month or so, I'm going to be live on YouTube every day, Monday through Saturday, for sure. Maybe sometimes Sunday if I think I've got something interesting to say. Because I'm leading up to a new launch of my free motion quilting masterclass, and I like to use this as an opportunity to sort of get out there in the quilting space and hear the questions that you're asking, talk about the things that I'm doing, and we start getting this conversation going about what types of things you are in fact needing help with and what you want to see in the future. And I appreciate the connection that comes from it, and you guys seem to appreciate the daily, I call them daily snippets. I've actually got a playlist called May 2025 Daily Snippets. You guys seem to appreciate me just talking about sort of impromptu topics that usually have to do with what I'm working on in my quilting studio. So, yesterday it was talking about this quilt coming up. Can you see how I'm just stretching that so that it's not forming pleats, but it's putting like fullness under every stitch? One of the topics coming up this week is the height of my long arm machine. I'm trying to remember some of the others that I've got sketched out. They're not coming to mind. But anyway, tune in. Subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell, and YouTube will let you know when I am in fact live. I'm trying to do them in the mornings, Pacific time. But I am squeezing them in to life. And also, when I've got a quilt loaded or something of interest happening. Okay, you guys, there are no actual pleats. There is a pillow in every feather, but there's no actual pleats. So, as we discussed earlier, certainly, a good wash in hot water and a pass through the hot dryer, get some crinkly goodness going on. All of that will just disappear. Here I am again, pushing it in, pulling it back under the needle. Pushing it in and pulling it back. Rinse and repeat. Choosing your quilting design wisely is critical for taking up fullness like this too. You want something with these small-ish scooping curves. Like even a curving fan is not going to be as effective as these scoops. Feather plumes, bubbles, something that's round and just scoops that fullness in. You would just drive yourself nuts if you tried to quilt something like mod boxes that's all straight lines on this quilt. You would just drive yourself nuts. So choose your quilting design wisely. It will help you or make you miserable, one or the other. I use my all over feather a lot when I've got a lot of fullness to deal with too, and it's quite similar to this. It has the same feather shape. It's just not arranged around a spiral. You see how I'm just mashing that fabric in there? Whatever it takes. So I mentioned early on, but it bears repeating. This is one of the places or situations where freehand quilting is really your friend. I don't know how it would be possible to manage this kind of fullness if a computer was doing the stitching. Maybe if you had it going slow enough, you would have two hands free. Maybe you could manipulate it under the needle. I'd just be a little nervous about having my finger all up in there when I don't have the power to stop and pause. You know what I mean? That also is the reason that I've got my ruler foot on. It's this thick profile foot, right, as opposed to the darning foot, which is very tiny. I did that on purpose because it's a barrier between my fingers. If I've got my fingers on the quilt surface, I can't inadvertently get them under the needle. I have, knock knock on wood, I have never stitched my finger with sewing machine or long arm quilting machine. And I feel like a safeguard like this is one of the reasons. I try to be smart about it. And I do get my fingers in there close, but wherever I can take a precaution, I will. And having this bigger, chunkier foot helps. If that feels a little too risky for you, you could actually put a spoon foot on. It inhibits a little bit your ability to manipulate the fabric under the needle, but it is safety first. You can't get your finger under that one. Now, I just noticed, do you want to put the big camera on, Dave, for a minute? I just noticed out of the corner of my eye a little flash of thread going on. See why? The end of my bobbin, or of my spool. So I'm just going to lock stitch my thread there and end my stitching. And we'll put a new spool on. Oh, and that really caught. Something's amiss in the bobbin. Let's have a check here. What's going on? I like to drop my blue seam ripper, if I can see where I stopped, right there, so I can find it when I come back. Check my thread color, 0861. Let me grab another spool. And by the way, I keep a couple empty spools on hand because I wrap my binding around them. When I'm prepping binding for a quilt and I kind of wrap it around my hands, I drop it over those spools. And that's how I store it, for one thing. And it's also how I sew it. When I sit down at my sewing machine, I prop that spool kind of between my knees, and then the binding just rolls off of it without tangling or fraying. It's very helpful. Okay, I do want to step to the side and have a look at my bobbin. Actually, let's just take one stitch here and see what it feels like. Know your machine, and actually it feels fine. Know your machine, know what that should feel like and sound like when you take one stitch. And I say, it's good. Feels good. Oh, give the shoulders a roll. We'll quilt a little bit more, and then we're going to take a tiny bit of a break. For me. This is, it's just more tense than typical quilting. I'm leaning over it. I'm sure you can see that. I've got my nose practically on the needle. And you're seeing here some of the discoloration. This was the staining that I was mentioning. I keep some retro soak on hand, which is a phosphate-free textile, particularly vintage textile friendly powder. I don't know that it's a detergent, but washing aid. Anyway, it's really good at removing stains like that, just kind of age stains, and really freshening up fabrics. So that's what I will do with this quilt when it is finished. I will load the washing machine with some water, throw in some of that retro soak, and let it have a sit in that for a while. Think about what it's done. So this line right here is the center of the quilt. So we are right in the middle of the Swiss Alps right now, which is kind of good news. I'm pretty confident it's not going to get any worse. I did last night when I was beginning this and starting quilting. I kind of wondered about myself for a minute. And I have to say, this is definitely pushing the limits of what's possible. You know, again, referring to that lady who said, wouldn't you have been wise to take off the borders and eliminate one of that first tight border, right? And the others would all fit better. You know, I think that would have been a better solution in terms of producing a better result, because I'm really pushing the limits here for what I can get smoothly eased in. However, I felt like a $40 garage sale quilt was a great place to push the limits, right? To try it. And live streaming on YouTube, also a great place to try new things, am I right? If you are enjoying this episode, I would love if you would give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel and click on the notification bell if you want to know each and every time I'm going live. Again, I'm doing it every day, Monday through Saturday. I would like to just say for the month of May, but I believe I started on the 6th, so I'm going to do it for a month. And I've created a playlist so that you can find them easily. May 2025 Daily Snippets. One of the topics this past week was using sheets for backings. You know, pros and cons. I got a ton of comments on that, which I was so happy to see. There are many other sheet users out there. It's a great solution. You know, if you need to use economy in your quilting, or if you just feel strongly about using things that are already existing, you know, the idea of sheets, and particularly of sort of retro sheets and building them into your quilts, is very, very attractive. For me, in addition, it's a bit nostalgic because my mom was very fond of purchasing sheets for quilt backing. Sometimes she even bought new ones because it eliminated piecing backing, and it's far, far less expensive than yardage. So it's a great solution. Anyway, we had a good chat about that, about the pros and cons and what sateen is and what percale is, and some of you tuning in educated us as to that. I actually didn't realize percale and sateen are weaves. I think I knew that about sateen, but I always thought percale was a like fabric content. You know, is it poly? Is it cotton? Is it a percentage? But it's not. It's a weave. I know a lot of places when I'm quilting you can't see my quilting design in detail, but in places you can catch it. And you notice that when I'm laying these feather plumes around the spiral, I'm also not closing them. In other words, I'm not usually bumping up right against the spiral. That is also helpful when you've got this tight amount of fabric. If you try to stitch right up to the spiral, you're more apt to get a little pleat right there. Or if you leave a kind of 1/8 inch of spacing, that's just one more place that you can tuck in a bit of ease. Push, get it all in there, pull. Push, pull. And you get a few wonky shaped feathers, but that will all come out in the wash, won't it? One of our boys' favorite phrase is, oh, it'll all buff out. And I feel like that applies to quilting. It'll buff out. It'll wash out. So here again, we've got a Dresden plate that is, it doesn't have stabilizer under it, so that's a plus, but it does have 2 layers of fabric here and 3 layers of fabric here. So that's going to be a thing. We'll just do the best we can. At least it doesn't have the stabilizer, which the earlier one that I did had, and I simply couldn't get any easing to occur with that one. Can you see how I've left that little bit of space? So if I had gone against, I'd have a pleat. But as it is, it's just going to look like a lovely washed crinkle. By the way, if anyone is falling in love with this quilt and desperately wants it, I think that I'm going to put it up for sale when this is all said and done. I'll bind it and have it fully finished. I personally don't love ginormous quilts. I prefer lap-size quilts, so I don't have any big ones in my house. And I'm not anxious to have one that's 106 inches long, but maybe someone out there is and loves these sort of autumnal colors. It is all made, you know, I do think it was a skillful person that made it. It is all quilting cotton, like it's beautiful fabric, quality fabric. And I put a quality cotton on the back. It's actually a Janet Ray Nesbitt fabric on the back. And it's kind of the same sagey green color as these little borders. I tried a few different, you know, creamy, caramely colored ones, and they weren't quite the same. It just didn't look well. And fortunately, I had a friend over bringing me some quilts to quilt. It's like, hey, Janet, A or B? And we both agreed. The sagey green was better. Okay, you guys, I'm going to take a break for a few minutes. My neck and shoulders and eyes need a break. So I'm going to break thread here so that we can pause and you can have a look at it. Move Stella off to the side. Ooh, let's get these thread tails while we're here. Okay. I think we're doing okay. Oh, there's more thread tails. So you all saw it. You saw the mountains, the peaks and valleys when I began, and they are quilted flat. There is a little fluff here, but I don't think, you know, any more than will fit in this. I'll catch it in the next advance. So I think we're doing okay. What do you guys think? All right, do we have any questions? Let me grab my coffee cup. It's lukewarm and horrible, but, you know, it's coffee. I used my ember mug early this morning, so it's dead. Beverly, it looks like it could make a nice autumn quilt for you with an interesting story to go along. Oh, it has an interesting story, all right. And I do reserve actually one wall in my living room for a rotating display of quilts, but I don't have 106 inches. Debbie, love your plumes design. Thinking about putting it on a quilt I just got from my guild. There's so many designs to choose from since taking the master class. Debbie is one of my happiest students, and it's just a joy to see her turning out quilts at a great rate since she took my master class. Okay. I hug my kids. Do you have a plan for the future? Are you keeping it, gifting it, selling it? I kind of answered that. I was just saying to Mr. Producer this morning, you know, an option would be, it would be a great wedding gift, assuming that it was a person who loved 90s fabrics in these sorts of colors, right? And that's the trick. That's the trick. Suburban Homesteader, I'm new to long arm quilting. Your tips are so helpful. Good. I particularly like the measurement piece so I can make sure it remains reasonably square as I quilt. Very practical and a gold nugget. Yes, Absolutely. I've done a couple reels lately of how I massage the roller actually and work that quilt out back flat. I haven't done that today. Certain fabrics pull up more than others. This one is not one of those. But anyway, lots of ways to do that. Sandy, I've used your hints about cans of beans or whatever to help with fullness. I thought about that today, Sandy. For those of you who aren't familiar with it, some quilters will use cans of vegetables, bottles of water, any small weight, and you can put those on both sides, like straddling your long arm nose, and it helps ease in fullness. But literally today, I needed to be able to manipulate it with my fingers. There's so much. Those cans come in handy when you've got a small area or a small amount, and this is over the top. It's the Himalayas. We're calling it the Himalayas. It's Mount Everest right there, right there. Kim, if the top doesn't have nice horizontal references, do you just keep in mind how many inches you need to try to work in with each advance? Or do you mark or pin your own reference points? Super question, Kim. Clearly on the sides, I can use my measurements to help, right? In terms of this direction, like there is a center. I've got the center of the quilt does have a seam that runs through the block, if you will. And of course, I can see point to point on these blocks that are set on point. So there isn't an exact seam line across it, but there are some visual reference points that I'm using. And, oh, Mr. Producer is adjusting me.
Shaking a little bit.
Do I need to duck?
No, I just need to move it. So it's going to shake for a second.
Hang on.
That's better.
There we go.
Sorry.
I think of the Messiah. I will shake the heavens. It's a little like that. Okay. Any more questions coming in? Rianne, thank you for all your tips and techniques. I've learned so much from you. Anyone that's not taken your classes should do it. Well, maybe this is a good point. You guys, I do need a little bit of a break on my shoulders and on my eyes. I can just feel them burning. So I thought, let's just take a couple minutes and pretend like we're in a room together and have a small discussion here about kind of the realities of YouTube and business, maybe. It's a big topic, and I've been thinking, as I've been developing my YouTube channel, creating my courses, creating my membership, serving you up with content, I'm always thinking about this because truly it's my heart's desire to support and help and encourage and share quilters who aren't as far along in their journey as I am. So whatever way that looks like, or they're building a business or whatever. And so YouTube is kind of the platform that I've zeroed in on because it lends itself to showing how to do things, right? And it's a good platform because it's free. You pay by watching ads, but it is free for you to consume, and that's wonderful. Over the years that we've had our YouTube channel, Mr. Producer and I have typically invited those that want to support our efforts to contribute to this little website called buymeacoffee.com. I'm all about my coffee, right? And so that was kind of a fun little thing, and you could either just send a couple dollars or you could commit to those couple dollars every month or whatever. But as I think about this, and as my business has been developing, I'm thinking I really want a way in which that goes two ways. I appreciate so much those of you who have supported and do support. This show really is only possible because of you. All our cameras, all our lights, those have all been upgraded and developed through literally your financial support. I feel like I'm PBS here. So we're super appreciative of that. But I sometimes feel like, okay, but what are you getting for that? So people send $5 a month and, they get a thank you from me. So I want to propose this to you. I've talked about my membership before, but let me talk about it again for a minute today. I have a membership called Advance. Not really because it's for super advanced quilters, but it's kind of a play on advancing quilts and advancing your skill, right? So it's called Advance. And that membership costs a little more. It's $12.97 a month, but I put new lessons and content in it all the time. So this is what I'm going to propose. If you really would like to support this channel, if you love this type of content, if you like my attitude and how I teach and how I share in my reality show, consider that as a way to work both ways to help us by supporting our channel and for you to receive something for that too. So that membership has been a few years developing. It's been about 2.5 years since I started it. And I've always added a couple of new pieces of content every month. So now it's getting fairly sizable. There's more than 60 lessons in there, and they're all kinds of things. They all have to do with machine quilting, but it might be a new edge-to-edge design like this one. It might be how to sew 2 backing pieces together and perfectly match the prints. It might be a guest teacher talking about how to quilt at your domestic machine with rulers. It might be a case study of a custom quilt that I've worked on, and like my whole assessment process and then design process, and then how I thought through what I was going to quilt and made choices, and then the process as I worked through it. I have lots of case studies on there. They're just uber practical like these shows are, but it's presented in more of a lesson format with me talking and teaching throughout. Anyway, there's more information on that. Dave is putting a link in the chat, and we pinned one to the top of the chat if you want to read more about it. But may I just suggest, if you're interested in supporting this channel, that's a great way to do it, where we both get benefit from it. Buy Me a Coffee is still there. It's fine. We have kind of a roll call at the end of this show of people who are regular contributors to that, and we appreciate it so much. But I want you to get the best value too. And just this idea of, I want to help as many quilters as I can. I'm on this sort of balancing act of being available to you, and yet there's so many of you, it's difficult to be available to answer individual emails, for example. So in this membership is a great way to, sometimes I'll have live question and answer sessions, right? Where you can come and ask any question you want, and I'm there to answer. Where when I have all these platforms, Facebook and Buy Me a Coffee, and right, I sometimes miss comments or questions, or simply run out of time to be able to address these things one at a time. So I appreciate your patience as we are forever balancing these things and trying to do the best job we can of being an encouragement and a service. And for me, it's my heart to encourage quilters. It really, really is. In fact, my business card says quilter, teacher, encourager. Hopefully that's how it feels to you. So if you're enjoying this episode, thumbs up. YouTube loves that. A couple things I will say. I mentioned earlier, YouTube is free to watch. It always is, but you pay by watching ads. And here's the thing, the platform does not belong to me. It belongs to YouTube, and it is a money-making venture for them. So there are only certain things that are within my control. Ads is one of them that I can't. I can say I want, levels of ads, and I have my channel set at the most conservative, the fewest ads that I can get. Inevitably, when you're watching long shows like this one, you still get ads. So I can't change that. I've made it the best that I can for you. So a better way, I feel like, for you to support me is not for me to ramp up that ad, often-ness. Gosh, the words escape me. Frequency, yes. I don't want to ramp that up so that I earn more from YouTube. I'd rather invest more time and connection and communication on a platform that's my own, such as the membership. So think about that. Let me know your thoughts on it, frankly. And a great thing about the membership is there's no commitment levels, right? So you can literally go to your profile at any moment and say, I'm done now. I've had enough for a while, or this is too costly, or whatever. You can cancel for any reason. And when you are a paid up member, though, you have access to everything that's ever been published, right? So it's not like you start from today and you get new things each month. No, the whole thing is open to any current member. So like I said, over 60 lessons in there. I've had some great guest teachers and all kinds of topics. There's lots of good stuff in there. Okay. The eyes have had a break. Are there more comments that I need to know before I keep quilting?
Yeah, a few.
All right.
I'm just going to get them in here. So you need 2 seconds.
Okay, let me get my coffee again. I've been doing a lot of talking today, you guys. Gosh. Leslie, Susan, I'm very new to my Q24, December of 2024. I've done maybe a dozen of my own tops. My first few, I had no issues. The last 2, my take-up bar keeps popping out as I'm sewing. Do you mean popping out of the ratchet clips on the edge? If that's what you mean, I suspect your tension is too tight. It's literally pulling too hard on it. And that's kind of a safety valve, if you will, so that your fabric doesn't rip. If you're pulling it that tight, probably it's too tight. Like not seeing your machine, I can't tell you this is what it should sound like or feel like, but I would check for that. You don't want your quilt tight, tight, tight like a drum. Lois, love your channel. I started watching in the winter here in WV, West Virginia. Thanks, Dave. I've learned so much and finally got the nerve to quilt my first free motion edge-to-edge quilt. Woohoo! Give Lois some kudos. I'm so pleased. I'm so pleased. That just lights me up. Diane, you provide such great and practical information. I love your membership idea. Super. Well, it's there for you at any time. And like I said, it's not a lifetime commitment. So you can do as much or as little as feels right for you. Bobbin with Brittany. Love the Sue Hines workshop in advance. I have all her books, but was still intimidated by the motifs. Use them all the time now. And just the tiny PS, advance without the ED is the word, right? Because it's not advanced quilters. It's just advancing. So advance. And yes, Sue Hines is a genius. She has contributed so much to quilting knowledge and skill. I am an enormous fan. She's a fun lady too. She's great fun. Janice, Readvance, does membership run monthly from the sign-up date or first of the month? Sign-up date. So if you sign up today, the 9th, then every month on the 9th is when your charge comes out. Zarina, I'm more of a custom quilter. Do you have a good set of classes? There is more custom quilting in advance than you see on Live and Unscripted. Gosh, I don't know if I could say a percentage. Maybe some of you who are in there want to chime in on that. That's one of the reasons I created it, is to have a platform for sharing some custom type quilting. Although that's not a thing I do a high percentage of, there is more of it in there. So many of the case studies, for example, will be a custom quilt with different things in different blocks, areas, borders, ruler work, etc. So again, there's no hyper commitment. So if you want to just try it out for a month and check out what's in there and see if that appeals to you, you can absolutely do that. There's no minimum commitment.
I just had to put this up.
Okay, this is Mr. Producer. Kudos to your camera, fella. Amen to that. I haven't specifically said thank you today, but boy, I need to. I say this so often. It is not a one-woman show. We are running today with 4 cameras, and we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 big lights shining on me and cords and cables everywhere. And I don't know what any of them does. I just know which camera to look at, right? So kudos to Mr. Producer. He does all of that stuff behind the scenes. Okay, one last sip. How are we doing for time?
We are an hour and a half.
Why did I not put my blue seam ripper down? What a silly goose. Oh, there we are. Whew. Okay, we're at an hour and a half. If you guys are good, you can chime in if you like to. If you're good, I'll keep finishing this pass and then do one more advance and see where we're at then and sort of see how it's shaping up. Which way do we want to go with this one? This way. For those of you who do have a Bernina or other machines which have adjustable handlebars, quilting one-handed like this, I recommend that you experiment with the placement of the handle. It can make all the difference in the world to how easy or smooth or fatiguing it feels. So mess around with the angle of the handle, you know, how high or low it is, whatever factors you can change, play around with them because you might find a way that feels much, much easier to you than another way, if that makes sense. For me, I have my handle fairly low down, in part because I'm so hunched over the quilting today. Like I really am having to get right in there and pay attention. And having that handlebar down low and close to it, it just, instead of having to hold my shoulder away up here, right, I can have it, in fact, I might even put it lower, right? I can adjust this way down so that it keeps my arm, you know, just less fatiguing. Here I am again, pulling. Push the fullness in, pull it under the needle. Dave, would you mind grabbing me a tissue? Bear with me a second. Let's get a little drippage on my nose. You can kind of see on these whiter areas the color thread that I chose. It is a considerably deeper cream, almost a tan, compared to this off-white fabric. That seemed like a good choice to me because I'm stitching across sage green and across some of this brown. And so that rich color felt to me like a happy medium. And I actually have, I should have talked about this earlier, I actually have sage green in my bobbin. So same brand and weight of thread, isocord, but a different color. But it's very similar as to hue, maybe, or saturation. I don't know what the technical term is, but it's not a dark sage. So that if either of those threads kind of show through the needle holes a little bit, they're quite similar. I just liked the look of the sage on that sage-colored backing better than the look of this cream. And there is so much of it. It takes more than a bobbin for each pass across the quilt. And I figure I will have 6 and maybe 7 passes. So yeah, we're talking an 8 bobbin quilt, which is pretty big when you're talking about edge-to-edge quilting. Not that uncommon with custom. But for edge to edge, that's quite a lot of quilting. Anyone care to place a wager as to how fast I'll have this quilt done? How many days do you think it's going to take me? I wish I had clocked my time, but I just didn't think of it last night when I began. And I suppose it's not really a fair measurement when I add in all the time that I spend stopping and talking with you. Speaking of bobbin thread, we're out. Those of you who are regulars know. Those of you who are new, I'll tell you. I don't try and measure or evaluate the emptiness of my bobbin or fullness of it. I just stitch till it runs out. And then I replace it and I do some lock stitches to secure the stitching. It's the fastest way, it's the most efficient for thread usage, and it's perfectly suitable, in my opinion, for these types of casual quilts with edge-to-edge quilting. I'm running all the way to the left because I'm going to add a drop of oil to Stella. Did I mention Stella is my long arm's name? Stella and I are such good pals, really. I was looking at photos this last week, and my first long arm, one of my friends named Lucy for me. I forgot to wind my bobbin, you guys. Let's get it going while we oil. Anyway, one of my friends named it Lucy, as in, I love Lucy. And she got me an I love Lucy sign. So I was reminiscing about that first machine. I did love Lucy. Oh, I just shifted the camera a little, Dave. I think it's okay, though. We have one camera attached to my left handlebar. So I have to remember not to shift it because it's so automatic, you know, to just joggle the handlebars into the most comfortable spot. And every so often I do that when I shouldn't. All right, we just have to wait for the bobbin. Now I'm pleased we're getting a good result. I feel like, oh, leave the seam ripper. We're getting a good result. And you guys are kind of seeing it, you know, at this long angle, and it looks fairly straight and square. I do know there's going to be a touch of bulging, but I don't think very severe. I don't think so. I think it'll be fine. What would you guys do with a quilt that's 106 inches long? That's longer than a king. I feel like it might have been more trendy in the 90s to make a queen-sized quilt, but long so that you could like put it under your pillows and up over, like my mom used to make beds, right? Saves making pillow shams in a way.
Well, somebody said you could make a jacket out of it.
Someone did suggest if all else fails, just cut it up and make a coat. Yeah. But again, this was a garage sale find. I paid $40 for it. And of course invested some backing, which I also got off a sale rack, and batting. And so I felt like how else am I going to know how far I can go, you know, with a wonky quilt, but to try. And because I'm me, I try it on YouTube. Live streaming. Good enough. Did you know, FYI, Bernina users, and frankly, freestanding bobbin winder users too, did you know that you can change how full your bobbin winds? I actually adjusted mine the other day. I was finding that quite frequently when I put a new bobbin in the first couple yards, all of a sudden I would have a thread tangle and my bobbin would be wrapped around the post of my bobbin casing. And I thought, why in the world? And I concluded if I put a little bit less thread on my bobbin, it stopped doing that. So on our Berninas, it's right here. There's a little screw right beside the bobbin winder. And it just adjusts the sensitivity of the release bar. And so most freestanding bobbin winders have the same thing. They have some kind of knob that pops off when the bobbin is full, and you can set that to be a little more sensitive and pop off earlier. Can be very helpful. Okay, I'm going down rabbit trails today, aren't I? So you won't be able to see it on this plaid, but I'm just overlapping my stitching by several stitches, what I had before, doing some lock stitches so that anchors the previous end and secures my current new end. And then on I go with the quilting. Take a minute and capture those thread tails. almost don't know what to do with myself quilting across this smooth fabric. Just a few more plumes to the edge of this pass, and I will go ahead and walk you through the next advancing of the quilt and kind of my setup for success. This is a great time to type in your questions or comments if you still have them. Great time to give this episode a thumbs up if you have enjoyed it. I would so appreciate that. Share it with machine quilting friends that you think might be interested. As always, live and unscripted is real. It is unedited. If you were here for the casual intro at the beginning, you totally saw that today. And I really, really do think there's value in just seeing work in progress in real time as it occurs, etc. There's just no substitute for that. I'm reading this really interesting book right now about, it's called Apprentice Nation, and it's about apprenticeships. And I feel like, you know, I can't invite all of you easily into my studio to quilt alongside me, but this is sort of the next best thing. You get to see problems as they arise, and then, you know, how I work through the solutions. And there's just no substitute for that. It can be really difficult to do those sorts of things on your own without having someone to watch and see why they do things or see why certain things don't work, etc. So I hope this takes the place of that. Maybe that's what I should call my membership. Maybe I should call it an apprenticeship. Just a thought. Okay, we'll stop with needle down. Take all our little apparatuses off. And we'll see how this is looking. Again, I'm giving that batting a nice good tug under there. I'm just going to flip the quilt up so I can double check that it's all good. This is such a big quilt. Problems can really get magnified under there if you don't keep an eye on it. How are we doing here? Not too badly. Like, I'm looking at the edge of it now. I can see, and it's hanging straight. There is still, let me move Stella so you guys can see this and appreciate it. Like, the bottom hem of the quilt is hanging fairly straight. And when I pull this smooth and pull up the excess, I have got a solid 3-inch pleat in my hand, which means there's still 6 inches here. Which means either I underestimated with the 7 or I'm not pulling enough in. So I'm going to be aggressive in this next pass. Even if it means a couple little pleats, I'm going to be aggressive getting that fullness up there. I just am. Because I've got limited space in which to get the rest of it. So this is just part of the, assessing with each pass. Like, how am I doing? Turns out I wasn't putting quite enough in. It's not awful. And turns out I probably will have a little swoop on the bottom of my quilt. Again, I'm certainly fine with 1/2 inch. I'm probably even fine with 1 inch. I mean, we're thinking a quilt that's 106 inches long, right? So 1 inch of swoop on the bottom is not the end of the world, I feel like. It's up there. Wow. That's all I have to say about that. Wow. There is a blue thread in the seam. Who knows? Maybe she was sewing with pale blue right there. So again, my key is distribute it as best I can. I may drop some pins in on this one because, boy, that's a lot. Wow! There's another Mount Everest right there. This is crazy. I was crazy. Whose bright idea was this anyways?
Somebody's asking the starching again. You might want to answer that again.
Let me base this side and we'll have a peek at questions again. I did think after I had begun last night, I didn't go back and do it, but after I had begun, I thought to myself, I could have taken out this center rectangle. There is space between, can you see that? Between the brown point and the edge, a generous 1/2 inch. I could have even taken that rectangle out, trimmed that down, even taken a bit off those points, and made this situation a lot better. Had I thought of that before I loaded it, I probably would have done that much undoing and resewing. I was not prepared to take all the borders off. But live and learn. Live and learn.
Yeah, but then you wouldn't have had a show.
Mr. Producer is saying, then I wouldn't have had a show. I mean, I think I still would have. It still would have been significant, but it would have been a little less. Okay, let's have a few questions and see where we're at for time. Yeah, we've been 2 hours already, so I probably won't do more quilting, but we'll chat a little bit about the situation. State of the nation. Laura, have you ever done ruler work on a fancy New York beauty? What advice do you have for making the ruler work less challenging for my Q19? Okay, what's a Q19? A Q16 or Q20? And are you working at a sit down or a long arm? And then we'll come back to that. Susan, I also like to cover my pillows so they don't get dusty. I don't have to mess with shams. Yep, it is certainly an easy way. My mom, I remember making beds like that. You did the quilt with a big fold back, and then you laid the pillows on there, and then you the quilt over the top, and it is an easy way, and it makes a lovely looking bed. Diane, thanks for the bobbin winding info. I've manually stopped the winding before it gets too full to avoid the very same issue, so good to know I can adjust. Every freestanding winder is a little bit different, but I think it's safe to say most of them have an adjustment. There's some screw on there that adjusts that. Debbie Fleming, I'd like to see you stitch in that Mount Everest. Well, I have a thought, and I think there's a question coming about this, so I'll hold the thought for just a sec, Debbie. Kim, would you decide to starch this pass given how much excess there still is? I saw this one coming, and I think my answer is yes. I feel like I need every little scrap of help that I can get with this, because that that is fairly unrealistic. I'm looking at 2 inches in my single advance. 2 inches out of 18 inches of stitching room, that's a high percentage. And it's both ways, right? So I think that's what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and call the episode after we've questioned and talked and chatted a little bit. And I'm going to starch this whole thing with spray starch and leave it to dry and see, if that helps even 10% of it. That's significant, right? Okay, part 1 of 2. Mom and Pop Quilt Shop. Wow, that's a lot of fabric. Yes, it is. When it's on the bed, no one will see and it will look amazing. That's what I'm holding out for. After I've run it through the laundry, it's going to be grand. Stick around, Debbie, and you'll see Susan work her magic. Well, I will do this. I'll post photos after it's done. And I'll do some that are looking out over the quilt so you can kind of see, is it square? Is it flat? Or how square is it? Let's put it that way. It's not going to be perfectly square, but I think the overall impression will be squareness. And, that's all we can ask for, right? When we're dealing with the Himalayas, as indeed we are. Oh, it's been grand. Thanks, you guys, for having patience with me as I try out crazy stuff like this on my YouTube episode. And I hope that it's helpful for you in some way, that when you come to a challenging quilt, you're like, I'll just take this one bite at a time and address it one step at a time. And it's doable. It's doable. And if nothing else, we learn from the experience and have something to go forward in that way. So again, live and unscripted, always a reality show, always in real time in my studio, usually working on a client project. Thumbs up and subscribe. Click the notification bell if you want to know whenever I'm going live. And I am doing that every week for the next month or so. Sorry, every day, Monday through Saturday for the next month or so. I'd love to have your comments on what types of topics you'd like to talk about. It's often just relating to something that I'm working on that day, but I can pull all kinds of things into that. So if you have questions, bring them on. Let's talk about them. Okay, Mr. Producer's making motions to me. We didn't finish Laura's question about the ruler work. Ah, my Q19 is a long arm from Grace Frame Company. I didn't remember that theirs were called Qs. Okay. I don't know that I have any miraculous tips for making it easier. It kind of depends on what difficulty you're having. Is it with holding the ruler stable, or is it with shoulder fatigue? Angela Walters is a fabulous ruler quilter and has a ton of videos that may be helpful. From my own experience, slowing down helps, and also the knowledge that ruler work takes practice. For example, knowing how hard to hold the ruler, how much pressure to put on it. Too much pressure makes it difficult literally to move your machine. Too little pressure and it slips out of place. Finding that sweet spot is just a matter of practice. I remember doing a whole quilt that had big old chevrons on it. And it kind of took me that whole quilt to get comfortable with using a ruler. That was early on in my stitching, so maybe that gives you a little bit of reassurance that it will come, it will get better. Betsy, where will you post these photos? Betsy, they're going to have to be on social media because it's the only place that I can put 8 or 10 or 12 photos that everybody can see them. I'm just starting to explore, actually. YouTube now has community, which looks much more like social media. And so I'll see about putting them there because clearly you have access to YouTube. I know some people don't do social media and I get that, but it is such a great and easy way for me to share. That's typically the way I've done, but I'll have a look at whether I can do it on YouTube as well. How's that? Okay, you guys, it's been a slice. Thanks for joining me. As always, have a great rest of your day and I'll see you next time.